Hey everybody, my name is Jackie Lauer. I'm a second year in the History PhD program here at the University of Michigan. I'll just be giving a little historical overview for the panelists today. Now, I just want to be very clear. I'm working off of an iPad for my notes. This is new for me, so we're all going to work together so we can get through this, okay? But I promise that we will, okay? Just be patient with me sometimes, okay? Thank you. I need it. I feel it. We got some good food from lunch. We're going to go forward, okay? So let's start in 1986, okay? So in 1986, the Detroit Free Press published a month-long series investigating the juvenile justice system as it was in the late 80s. Through interviews with public officials, conversations with teens, and the use of charts and graphs, the series exposed Wayne County's juvenile justice system as not just inefficient in delivering justice, but complicit with the supposed rise in criminal behavior amidst Detroit's children, particularly black youth in Detroit, who were depicted as excessively violent and unnaturally adult. To the Detroit media, the vision was clear. The juvenile justice system in Detroit and then the state at large was broken. What could repair such a derelict administration? For Michigan's legislature, the fix was simply to get tough. At the demand of Detroit Democrats and the urgent support of prosecutors, the Michigan legislature passed a juvenile crime package in 1988 that expanded prosecutorial discretion to waive youth into the adult system for quote-unquote serious felonies with certain checks and balances, set criteria for waivable offenses, and raised the juvenile system jurisdiction to 21. In 1995, Republican Governor John Engler perpetuated this language further to suggest that the state was run by juvenile quote-unquote thugs and punks, still racialized and still classed as black poor youth, that left in their carnage law-abiding citizens living in fear. Under the tutelage of Governor Engler, Michigan's legislatures, Democrats and Republicans alike, passed a new set of legal reforms, even tougher, in 1996, that galvanized previous 88 reforms to expand prosecutorial discretion to waive youth into the adult system, include 17-year-olds in the adult system, eliminate minimum age limits on adult sentences, limit access to expungement, and emphasized the culpability and distrust upon any juvenile who encountered police and judicial officials. As this graph demonstrates to us, there was no significant violent crime spike in the late 80s or the 90s for that matter, and yet juvenile commitment to the Michigan Department of Corrections vigorously rose between implementation of both laws. In short, the panic was a result of manufactured fiction. In short, this did not reflect reality. Nevertheless, this fiction about black youth violence in Michigan had, and continues to have, significant impacts that inflated racial disparities to make punitive commitments seriously disproportional, contingent upon race within the juvenile system. This disproportionality exists at all stages of the system, from arrest to caging in Michigan, proportional to children of color's respective population in the state of Michigan. We see the particular severity of these disparities by looking at that top bar, by looking at the rates of those black youth waived or designated into the adult system in 2012 from the invaluable work of the Michigan Council of Crime and Delinquency, now known as the MCYJ. This statistic is galvanized by a wider national view by looking at the incredibly disproportionate rate at which children of color were sentenced to life without parole prior to 2012. So let's take the example of Nathaniel Abraham, of which some of us in the room may or may not be familiar. Nathaniel Abraham of Oakland County in Pontiac, Michigan, was a 12-year-old who prosecutors decided to try as an adult in 1999 for the alleged first-degree murder of a neighbor. Police arrested Nate in the middle of class at his school while he was in his Halloween costume. He was simply being a kid. While the presiding judge decided to sentence Nate to a juvenile facility and not to incarceration in an adult prison, the previous statistic demonstrates to us that that was not always the case for all youth. The language of adultified, violent black youth and a push to get tough persisted throughout Nate's trial, with some quotes that you can see here. And this slide is selections from just one article. So if we contextualize this further to look at more articles, more records, there's more of a historical record there. I promise you. I promise you. Yet others realized the social construction of this racialized image through the media. Others outright resisted it. We can look to local, everyday people from these two quotes from Black community members in Oakland County. They were not organized activists or radicals. They were not a part of a formal organization with no demonstrative agenda, just neighbors who called the juvenile system for what it was, racially motivated and excessively punitive. Their version of Michigan's juvenile justice system varied, but one that was centered on the transformative potential of rehabilitation and care. And it was in stark contrast to their Democratic and Republican representatives at the time. So where do we go from here to transform juvenile justice in Michigan in the 21st century? With those community voices echoing into these initiatives, the Michigan Center for Youth Justice made a list of recommendations in 2014 for the reduction of Michigan's youth's exposure to the adult system. They have accomplished their number one recommendation, and their number two recommendation is a capacious yet direct attack on prosecutorial waiver. I will let Jason and others discuss their current work and exactly where these past initiatives fit into the present conversation. And while these two initiatives on the screen have much to do with the adult system, this panel will mostly orbit around the juvenile system while attending to the adult system when appropriate. I appreciate you all listening to my little blurb. We did it. We got through. And I will pass it over to the very capable hands of my fearless co-lead, Kate Markey. Thank you all.
Okay, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kate Markey. I'm also a history student at Michigan. Thank you, Jackie, for that wonderful historical overview. So this panel is entitled Transforming Juvenile Justice, and we're going to have a pretty free structure. Each of our three wonderful, capable panelists are going to have about 12 to 15 minutes to speak on a range of topics. We're hoping that you will all focus on some of the recent legislative wins that we've seen in juvenile justice, perhaps the Raise the Age campaign, some of the outcomes that came from Whitmer's Juvenile Justice Reform Task Force, and then also maybe speak to some of the reforms that are still in process, things that you think are feasible, barriers, things that you'd like to see moving forward. So our three panelists today, I'm not going to give you their full backgrounds. You can find those in your program. But we have with us today Jason Smith, who is the Executive Director of the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, Senator Jeff Irwin, who's currently serving his second term in the Michigan Senate, and Jose Burgos, who works as the Michigan Campaign Coordinator for the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth. So we will start with you, Jason.
Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, wow. Good afternoon, everybody. So like Kate said, I'm Jason Smith, Executive Director of the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, or MCYJ for short. MCYJ is a statewide organization that focuses on juvenile justice reform. We do policy advocacy, we do public education events, technical assistance to help local jurisdictions implement best practices. Next year we'll be celebrating our 70th anniversary. We were previously, for most of that history, known as the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency, focused on both youth and the adult system, but in 2019 made the decision to focus exclusively on youth justice for many reasons, but one being just there's a lot of people doing great work in the adult space, and there wasn't an organization really digging into youth justice issues. So like Kate mentioned, I can talk about the Raise the Age campaign because for the youth justice system, it really was the catalyst to look at the system and what's going on with young people when they come in contact with the legal system for the first time in decades, since the slides that Jackie shared about the tough on crime era. One thing that's important to know about the youth justice system here in Michigan, or the juvenile justice system, we like to say youth justice at our org, is that it's decentralized. And so a lot of the decisions day to day on how young people are treated when they come in contact with the system, the menu of services that kids receive as interventions, and the use of detention, and the use of longer term residential placement which is offers treatment, or it could be a long-term confinement situation, is really decided upon county by county. And so I would say between the 90s and really like 2010, 2013, 2014, a lot of the changes you saw were more so at the local level than the state level. And so there were communities that made significant changes to how they treated young people, reducing the number of young people being placed outside of the home, and looking at how they use interventions differently, how they use data. But it was disparate in those changes. And so it resulted in a situation that we like to call justice by geography. Because it's a county-controlled system, a young person's experience could really vary depending on where they live. And so the Raise the Age campaign came about because it was really a national movement. In that time frame, you saw a lot of states look at what we like to call being smart on crime, and ways that we can improve outcomes for people, in my situation, young people, but also improve public safety by being data informed and leaning into what works. There was a lot of research around adolescent brain development and Supreme Court decisions based on that really articulated the need to treat young people who come in contact with the system differently than adults. And I think that became a driver for Michigan to look at changing the laws around older youth that come in contact with the juvenile justice system. So Raise the Age didn't start with us, that advocacy campaign. It was a national movement. You saw in one of the slides the report that the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency created in 2013, 2014 called Youth Behind Bars. That was really our way to start to dig into this issue and look at information and data around young people who come into the adult system. And we were able to find a lot of interesting points around the use of waiver or transfer to the adult system, what the offenses are, who were mainly impacted, what their sentences look like. But one of the largest things we saw is that, overwhelmingly, kids were entering into the adult system simply because they were 17. No matter what their offense is, no matter what their background was, just simply reaching the age of majority at that time was the driver for the majority of young people being in the juvenile or in the adult system. And so that ended up being the catalyst for advancing legislation to raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction. So we went from developing that report, going to doing public education campaigns around the state, and it was surprising how many people that we engaged with at events we did that just simply thought that the age of criminal responsibility in Michigan was already 18. Didn't know that 17-year-olds were treated as adults. And at that time, I can't remember now, so long ago, but there was around 13 or 14 states that still treated 17-year-olds as adults. There was a few, New York and North Carolina are examples, that treated 16-year-olds as adults. But over time, more states ended up passing legislation that brought 17-year-olds into the juvenile justice system. It did not impact waiver. There's still that mechanism in every state that allows for young people to be transferred to the adult system for various offenses, but at least their cases would be initiated for the most part in the juvenile justice system. So that list of recommendations that Jackie shared, that was at the back of the report. That's still on our website, the Youth Behind Bars report, though very dated now. And it became a legislative reform because a legislator came to one of our public education events in Detroit. His name is Harvey Santana. His partner is now in the Senate in Michigan. And he said, give me your Christmas list of legislation you're interested in working on. And we offered all that stuff. We were like, just go for it all. And he developed a working group that brought prosecutors and sheriffs and judges and people from the MDLC and the youth justice system and us all together to try to work on things. And it slowly but surely got whittled down to just raising the age of juvenile court jurisdiction. And though we wanted to work on those other things, we felt like if we had the opportunity to seize the moment to advance that important reform, that we should do it. There was bipartisan support for it, though it took 3 legislative sessions to pass. And over time, I think the more states that passed legislation that raised their ages of juvenile court jurisdiction, the more we had conversations around changing how we do criminal justice here in Michigan. It made it more inevitable that the law would change here. And so, we took our lumps, and we were able to work to support the advancement of legislation to different stages in each session. I think the first session, it was introduced in the House. It passed through the House, the full House vote, but then didn't get a hearing in the Senate. The second time, I think we got a hearing. It voted out of the House Judiciary Committee, but didn't get a full House vote. But then the next session, the Republicans, who were in control of the legislature this entire time that we were working on those bills, in the House, each year they put out a report of what they planned, their policy priorities, what they plan to work on in the next year. And they included raise the age as one of those policies that they plan to advance. So everyone knew coming in to the next session that it was going to be a priority. And that whole time, we were still doing our public education events, still, doing op-eds, getting messengers that could share why this was an important reform with their own words and their own constituencies out there in the public. One of our support on a lot of things that we do actually is the Michigan Catholic Conference. They've supported Raise the Age and other reforms, but having them be able to, they have their own lobbyists, who's great, to go out and speak to legislators and people that we can't. It was so powerful. And we learned over time, and thankfully I'll say, being one of the last states to do it, we learned from the other states on communication and messaging and what works and what doesn't. We were able to argue, for example, that it makes sense business-wise to advance this legislation. You have a 17-year-old in Illinois or Canada, even, who could be similarly situated, commit the same offense as a 17-year-old here in Michigan, and have a better chance of getting a job in Michigan. We had a better chance at the time of getting into the University of Michigan than a 17-year-old who resides here. That worked in getting support from the Chamber of Commerce and groups like that normally don't weigh in on justice issues. And so by the time Raise the Age was signed into law, which was Halloween 2019, there was only 3 states left. I'm thinking that's right. 3 states left that still treat 17-year-olds as adults. That is Wisconsin, Texas, and Georgia. And so, again, that really led to the inevitability that reform was going to happen. And over time, we ended up getting support from juvenile justice stakeholders, probation officers, judges, and court administrators that admitted, yes, we could do a better job of serving these young people. They are still dependent members of their family units. They're juniors and seniors in high school. Every other system that they touch, the child welfare system, community mental health, schools, what have you, they all treat 17-year-olds in their youth services. And so it only made sense that young people, when they come in contact with the system, should be treated that way too, since you're going to be interacting with the other institutions that serve them. So it was signed into law in 2019. It went into effect in 2021. That gave the juvenile court time to prepare to implement having 17-year-olds in their system. I want to say that one of the reasons why the juvenile court folks were so supportive of it is because they already served 17-year-olds, right? If there's a kid on probation who's 16 or whatever, has a birthday, they stay within the JJ system. So it wasn't new. It just was a larger percentage of these young people coming into their system. Now, the unfortunate part is that the effective date happened in the midst of COVID, so implementation was kind of wonky, but still, those who had the ability to prepare did. And again, like I said up top, this was an opportunity for the statewide, the legislature to look at juvenile justice system through a different lens than they have in many years, not as the adult system, but actually a system really built for kids, and there's issues and players and resources that are vastly different, and they have to be considered in that way. And so from that interest in that, there were other reforms that came from it, like looking at changing the issues around juvenile records. That came as a result of the state looking at the adult system and expungement and looking at adult records. There was some consideration about privacy for young people who come in contact with the system and how they should have the ability to move on once they complete their term of court wardship. And the biggest, I think, reforms or opportunities that came from this statewide look at juvenile justice was Governor Whitmer established a task force to look at a range of issues in the juvenile justice system. It was a multi-stakeholder task force. I was appointed to it. And it looked at issues from the point of arrest all the way through once a kid is placed in residential facilities, treatment facilities, and what their reentry system looks like. There were 32 recommendations that came out of that task force. That report's on our website as well. And I believe about 6 issues from that became legislative reforms that took again 2 sessions to actually be signed into law, but are really transformational. I like to say foundational and transformational, like transformational in their own right, but also lay the groundwork for future reforms. So one example is the elimination of juvenile court fines and fees. This was an issue that our organization had been advocating for a couple years before the task force met, because we had heard from families who were being charged the full amount for their young person being placed in detention or those longer-term residential placements, which could be up to $300, $400 a day. So we knew kids and families who were charged over $100,000 in bills, and they had no choice. This was, up to the court to even place the kid out of the home or where they're placed, And so the fact that it was included as a task force recommendation and voted on unanimously by the Attorney General's office and the people representing the prosecutors and the sheriffs and the judges was a huge thing. Provided more momentum for it to pass than we could have done on our own. And then the second largest reform that came from that was we won't go too deep into it, but basically the way that juvenile justice is funded in Michigan is that counties pay for all of the costs up front for all the services that kids receive, whether it's community-based care, if they're on probation, substance abuse treatment, or anger management, or whatever it is, and then detention and longer-term residential placement. And then the state, through DHHS and this fund called the Child Care Fund, they reimburse the counties back 50% for those eligible expenditures. So one of the reforms that came out of the task force recommendations and then was signed into law was to change that funding structure to reimburse communities back 75% for using community-based options to incentivize the use of community-based care over out-of-home placement. And that includes even pre-arrest diversion. So before a kid even gets to the court system, to again incentivize that. And it also includes respite care or shelter care for situations for young people that may need to be out of the home temporarily but don't warrant detention. And so we think that the implementation of those reforms, which went into effect last year, that could be the way that the vehicle for reforms like setting a minimum age of juvenile court jurisdiction, which we currently don't have right now. That was one thing that was debated, and it became a recommendation of the task force. But one of the pushback, it wasn't unanimous like the rest of the recommendations were. One of the pushback, some of the pushback that was received for that recommendation was the argument that, well, if you have a 11-year-old, 12-year-old who got into trouble, may have even been violent or something like that, and they're not in the juvenile justice system, what do you do? How can you provide them services? The answer will be these diversion programs that crop out of the expansion of the child care fund for community-based care. It'll allow for us to then answer that question to the legislature and advance that reform. And so our work right now, like I said, is partially around technical assistance. We're about to start a huge project with the Department of Health and Human Services to support 14 counties around the state in expanding their community-based continuum of care to align with the goals of the reforming the child care fund. Just signed the contract for that and starting that project next Tuesday. That's going to be our work for the next couple of years, and we're hoping that the legislature, no matter the state, because again we were successful with a Republican-controlled legislature, but we're hoping that there still is an interest in tackling youth justice, and with better data, which also was a recommendation and is work being done, and more options for how to treat young people, both keeping them out of the system whenever possible, but also making sure that if they are system involved, that it's effective and puts them in a position to thrive as they transition to adulthood instead of being in a vehicle to the adult system, that it'll allow us to move forward on some of the future reforms that we're interested in. So stop there. I think that was around 15 minutes.
You're an expert at this. Thank you. Okay, great. Senator Irwin, take it away.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to follow Jason Smith and to work with him on the many things that he's working on. My name is Jeff Irwin. I'm a state senator for the 15th district. That means that if you live in the southern half of Ann Arbor or anywhere in the Ypsilanti area or anywhere all the way down to Tecumseh and Manchester and Clinton, then you're my direct report. So I would appreciate an evaluation now or later at any time. Usually they come every couple years, but for me, I'm nearing the end of my time in the legislature. Here in Michigan, we have something called mandatory inexperience laws for our politicians. We want to make sure that the people who are making the most important decisions about our laws and how we spend our taxes don't actually know what's going on. So we adopted these mandatory inexperience laws, and I'll be done serving in the legislature soon. But it's been a great opportunity, and an opportunity that probably would have only been afforded to me at the time in my life when it was because of our mandatory inexperience laws pushing out the people before me. So I want to talk about one story of success, one story of failure, why I think some of these things happen. But first, before I get there, I want to just reflect a little bit on what Jason was saying about these projects and these missions to try to improve our criminal justice system. He talked a lot about the raise the age proposal. That was something that went on for many, many years, and I was in the legislature during those many years, and every time we would bring it up and it wouldn't pass, I would always feel like a moment of failure. But one of the great things about working on improving public policy is that when you fail, you can always come back and try again. And when you succeed, oftentimes those are successes that continue to echo into the future. And so I know that when that Raise the Age campaign was just starting, and I'm not sure if you were there yet or not, but one of the things I did very early on that represented my values around juvenile justice was to introduce a Raise the Age package that fully restored judicial review of these juvenile waivers. Now, I want to take just a brief second to explain this, because in Michigan, up until I believe the 1930s, the way it worked was if a juvenile committed the crime, a prosecutor could say, hey, I think this is really serious. I think this juvenile should be charged as an adult, and I'm going to charge him as an adult. They would bring that into court, and then the judge would have to be a second elected person in that community who would review that and would say, the prosecutor thinks this person should be charged as an adult. Am I going to approve that, or am I going to deny that? That's the way it should work in every case. That's the way it should work in every case. That's the legislation I introduced. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get there, and folks were working through the process and try to get a compromise proposal that would move us significantly forward, and that's what was ultimately passed. And it couldn't have been passed if it weren't for folks like Jason, who worked really, really hard on that. But I also want to highlight something else he said. which was he mentioned the Catholic Conference, but I think he could have also mentioned a number of other faith-based organizations, a number of other organizations who work on criminal justice reform throughout the state of Michigan. And I think he also mentioned the prosecutors and the judges, bringing those folks together to try to slog through the disagreements, to try to find out, well, if we disagree on that, maybe we disagree on this, and doing that hard and detailed work to get us to a point where the legislature could do something meaningful to raise the age. That coalition work, bringing those folks together, bringing those disparate voices, that's what made it happen. So I wanted to talk about that and just kind of bring that up because a lot of times those non-conventional partners are the ones that really are the secret spice that gets it through. Okay, so one of the other things that happened during my time in the legislature that I was really, really fortunate to be involved with, and it was actually, Jason was very involved in this, Jason Smith was very involved in this, and so was the Center for Youth Justice. And I remember back when I was first serving in the Senate about 6 years ago, one of the things that was happening, as Raise the Age was really starting to roll, we started to talk about a whole nother proposal around expungement of criminal records. And everybody was talking about clean slate, clean slate, clean slate. And that was a big movement in Lansing to try to get something done to allow people who've done something wrong to get their record expunged in cases where it made sense. And there's a whole lot of momentum around this, and it was a great moment because, as Jason mentioned earlier, the Republicans controlled the legislature, and so we were looking for things that maybe could get done in that environment, but with a Democratic governor, and so Clean Slate seemed to have a lot of momentum because it said something about redemption, which I think some of those non-standard partners like. It said something about economic development, which employers are thirsty for cogs to turn into their economic machine, so that's us. And so, we were trying to put all those things together. And at a certain point, some friends of mine, Mary King and Jason Smith, came along and they said, hey, Jeff, there's a lot of talk about clean slate, but have you ever noticed no one's talking about record expungement for kids? And I thought, oh my God, you're right. I also was not thinking about record expungement for kids. And there was all this momentum. And so why don't we have clean slate for kids? And so I was able to work together with the Michigan Center for Youth Justice. We put together some legislation. We recruited a bipartisan partner. And, that was the most significant legislation I passed in my first term was clean slate for kids. I was able to get the then chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Peter Lucido, who's now the prosecutor of Macomb County. He introduced a bill that was the companion to mine. His bill was one that would make records private for juveniles in certain circumstances, and my bill essentially allowed juveniles who had stayed out of trouble for a couple years after they became adults to have their cases expunged, and in some cases to have those cases expunged automatically if they were sufficiently low-level crimes. One of the things that was very, very interesting, though, that happened in that process, what happened with Clean Slate, it happened with Clean Slate for Kids, it happens a lot of times with these pieces of legislation, is that as you're working along the way, there'll be someone who will come along and they'll say, well, I'm okay giving some redemption, I'm okay giving a path to rehabilitation for those offenders, but I'm not okay giving a path to redemption to these offenders. And so I just want to talk about that a little bit, because oftentimes one of the challenges I face is in trying to get everybody on the bus and keep everybody on the bus. But oftentimes what happens is that because of politics, someone will say, well, I don't know, what about that sex offender? What about that school shooter? And those are often the things that end up getting compromised through the legislative process. And every one of those compromises, has the risk of leaving folks behind who really, in my opinion, deserve to get a second look, deserve to have a chance at rehabilitation, deserve to have a chance to show that 10, 20, 30 years down the line, they're a different person now and they can be, safe in their community. So that was, a big success we were able to get through, and it was interesting that we were able to get it through during an environment of mixed control, mixed partisan control in Lansing. Then what happened was Democrats ended up taking over the Michigan legislature for the first time in 40 years. I served in the Michigan Senate. Republicans controlled the Michigan Senate continuously. I repeat this in every meeting I can because people don't seem to get this. Michigan Senate was controlled continuously by Republicans from 1983 to 2023. From the Atari was released. Right? It was a very significant moment in my young life. Ever since then, And so when you're wondering, like, why aren't our schools more well-funded? Why aren't our roads more funded? Well, they've had a blocker for a long time. So anyway, in 2023, finally, for the first time, Democrats take control of all three legs of the stool in Lansing. And I think there was a lot of folks, including myself, I'm somewhat ashamed to admit now, who were really, really excited. Oh my God, now we're going to be able to get all the things done. And maybe we're going to be able to dust off this criminal justice agenda and get some things done that were hard to get done in these previous years. Well, this is, I guess, my story of failure, because one of the things that I worked on, because I thought that this would be the time and the opportunity, was I had the opportunity to work with this gentleman on juvenile life without parole. And we took, a package of bills that we've been working on for a number of years and introduced them with new vigor and got bipartisan support to a certain extent, and started to roll these bills out and say, hey, look, in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court said that locking up a juvenile without the opportunity for parole, without even a chance for them to get in front of a parole board, was cruel and unusual punishment. That's not something that you can do in America to kids. 2012. And even though that happened in 2012, there I was in the legislature a couple years ago saying it's been like almost 10 years and we still haven't done anything in Michigan to fix our law, to align our law with that standard. And so once again, we introduced legislation to end juvenile life without parole and to basically say that all juveniles, even if they do something really serious, will have a chance to get in front of the parole board. Our initial proposal was they should get a chance at 10 years in, and that their sentence should be 10 years to 60 years, and that there'll be no more life for juveniles. That was our proposal. And we were hoping that we could get something done. We expected that maybe we might have to negotiate a little bit. A lot of states have adopted policies where they get their first shot at the parole board at 15. But unfortunately, we ran into a real brick wall. And we ran into a real brick wall because of politics. And what I want to do now is I want to take you back to one of the slides. I believe it was when Jackie was introducing things, it mentioned that look how there was this huge welling up of concern during the tough on crime area in the 90s, and look how this chart shows that there wasn't actually an increase in crime. Isn't that curious? Well, we experienced that same thing in the last few years, where there's been this big bubbling up of concern about crime, and there's crime in the streets, and crime is out of control, crime. Mm-hmm. It's every night on the news, trying to scare people for a particular reason. I think you know what it is, but I'm going to say it here in a second. And so even though crime is at historic low, we were getting all these messages. And the reason we were getting all these messages, I believe, is because for the Republican Party, it is valuable to their political outcome to drive people apart using fear and racism. Racism is an incredibly powerful force in American politics. It has absolutely shaped Southeast Michigan, the place we live. And Republicans are using it politically to try to drive voters toward them. So even though 2 years ago, when we had split control, we had a number of Republican colleagues who were saying, yes, I believe in smarter justice. Yes, I see how we're wasting an incredible amount of money in the criminal justice system. Yes, I believe in rehabilitation, maybe even claiming to be a Christian. And all of a sudden, all of that evaporated as soon as Democrats had control. And they saw using crime as a political tool and a wedge and a cudgel to beat their Democrat colleagues. And when we bring these issues up in committee, they would bring out all manner of disgusting attacks, saying that if Democrats want juvenile offenders to have a chance to get in front of the parole board and show that they've been rehabilitated, that means that we support pedophiles, or that means that we support murder, or that means we support school shootings, and it just gummed everything up. And in a situation where Democrats have one vote majority in the House and a one vote majority in the Senate, you only need one mansion or one cinema to stop anything. And that's what happened. The criminal justice agenda was, sorrowfully for me, really moribund in the last couple years. And the areas where we were able to make progress were not largely in statute, they were largely in budget. They were largely with things like investing in reentry, things like fees for juveniles, things like that, right? Things like changing the reimbursement model for juvenile offenders through the child care fund. We made some progress on some important issues. So I don't want to say that nothing happened, but the politics around bills like juvenile life without parole got all twisted up with politics and with the moment we're now in unfortunately. So what can we do about it? I just want to close by saying there's a lot of great organizations in this room that I get a lot of benefit from working with. I would encourage you to connect with those groups and to become a part of those groups and to, respond to their action alerts. I would encourage you to connect with your politicians. People like me, we work for you. So every single one of you has at least 2 employees in Lansing. You have a state representative and you have a state senator. Have you ever asked them what they think about these issues? Have you ever gone to one of their coffee hours and said, do you think that if a juvenile commits a crime, they should get some chance for parole? I've been hearing about Miller v. Alabama. I've been hearing about how we could give juveniles a chance to get out and show that they've been rehabilitated. Do you believe in rehabilitation? Make them answer that question in front of their communities. So I would encourage you to get involved, join these organizations, get active politically, because the more we talk about these things, the more the right answer becomes apparent.
All right, I guess I'm next. Thank you very much. My name is Jose Burgos. I am the Michigan Campaign Coordinator for the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth at CFSY. CFSY is a national nonprofit organization out of Washington, D.C. That has been very instrumental in getting life without parole for children abolished in 28 states, and still hoping that Michigan will become the 29th state to do so. I come to this work by way of myself being a former juvenile lifer. At the age of 16, back in 1991, I was arrested and charged as an adult. And at that time, when I received, first at the time of incarceration, I never knew that a child could be sent to prison, let alone be sent to prison for the rest of their lives. And we've heard this morning today about the disparities, right? And I think, one of the things that I want to first point out that I remember walking into the Wayne County Youth Home for the first time, and it was almost like witnessing the disparities that we're talking about this morning. I was there for a whole year throughout the trial and sentencing process, and I remember that every single child that was up there facing adult charges were all black and brown except one child. That child was a white kid out of Westland, Michigan. The vast majority of the rest of us were all from Detroit. And in that year, every single one of us that was facing, every single black and brown child that was there that was facing adult charges, we all got sent to prison with life without parole sentences. And the only white child that was there actually got sent to the juvenile system to the age of 21. And he's been out. He's running a business. He's very successful. And the reason why I point that out is because, number one, he went back to the juvenile system, only served 5 years, and even then, he still became very successful. And what that tells me is that, we didn't have to send every single child to the adult system to serve life without parole when we have, examples and we have the data that shows that getting sent as a juvenile would have been good enough. But again, as what you've heard this morning, during that time, there was a lot of rhetoric and we're seeing, things reverse and going back to the same thing today, right? We're back during that time, there was this big myth about the super predator juveniles and stuff like that, the adultification of children, making children appear as, as adults opposed to children. I mean, just recently I was watching the news the other day in Oakland County, with the history that they have. Not too long ago, maybe like several weeks or a month or something like that, there was a 13-year-old kid who had committed some crimes in Oakland County. And the sheriff, I was watching the press conference, and the sheriff was mentioning the fact that he was a 13-year-old kid. And he says, for a 13-year-old kid, he's very tall. You know what I'm saying? And so as I'm listening to this, I'm noticing that the language he's using, he's being purposeful in the way he's using that language and how he's presenting this case to society, right? And that's been a history not only in Oakland County, but it's been a history very much so in here in Michigan. And so when I went and I got sentenced to life without parole. And again, the very first prison that I went to, the Michigan Reformatory, I again was faced with that racial disparity. I walked in there, and the first thing I seen was just a body of brown and black bodies, and brown and black, literally kids, because at that time, the Reformatory, that was the place where everybody under the age of 21 was sent to start off their time. And even though at the time I don't think I was conscious enough to really understand what it was that I was seeing, there was something inside of me. There was something in my gut, man, that was saying like, there's something wrong about this. You know, like how is it that at that time, it was 1992 when I entered the prison system. But even then, like, how is it, man, that, you know, we have these prisons all over the state, I'm sure all over the country, that look like this, and there seems to be nobody outside of this place, you know, trying to get some answers about this. And so throughout my time in incarceration, you know, the more I got older, the more maturity started to set in, the more I started to understand what it was that I was facing. I was facing the rest of my life in prison, and for the life of me, I couldn't understand how it was that I ended up in this situation. Not to take away any accountability for what I did to commit, you know, the crime that I committed to land me there, but it was like it was that inner child in me that was screaming out for help, and there was no adults that was coming to my rescue, right? Like, even though at that time I was already in my 20s, that inner child in me was still yelling out, right? Because it was almost like at every turn of my journey of incarceration, it was always met with hostility. It was always met with negativity. There was never nobody ever said, you know, put an arm around me as a child and say, hey, you know, we're going to help you out, right? And so that it weighed on me throughout the years. And then we heard Ronnie mention earlier, Deborah LaBelle, getting that letter from Deborah LaBelle. I too received that letter. I was in 2003. I found myself, you know, in segregation, feeling like, you know, this is like the end for me, right? This was my rock bottom, right? Sitting in segregation, trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of prison? You know what I'm saying? Like, there has to be something better than this. And then this little glimpse of hope came in the form of a letter from Deborah LaBelle, who said, you know what? We're having conversations about life without parole for children. We believe that this sentence is cruel. We're one of the only countries in the nation, in the world that do this. And do you want to be part of this study? And I immediately wrote her back. I still have the letter. You know, today I got that copy of that letter at home. And today, all those years later, I now work as the coordinator here in Michigan for the organization that she co-founded to end this sentence, right? And I, you know, when I came home after the resentencings, we've heard about Miller, we've heard about Montgomery. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court said that we had to abolish the mandatory aspect of sending children to prison. But again, Michigan, with the history that it has, at the time we had a attorney general that said, well, you know what? We're not going to apply that to the new cases. We're going to apply that to the old cases, right? And he knew. I mean, you know, as attorney general, I'm sure he knew, you know, more than anybody else that law was supposed to be applied retroactively. But he also knew that in fighting this in the courts, it was an easy way to get more years out of us. You know, they were trying to get every single day, every single minute out of us. In Michigan, like Deb said earlier, was, you know, 300 plus people that were serving this sentence. And so it took us until 2016 when the Supreme Court once again visited this issue and said, you know, because some states were applying it retroactive and some wasn't. And so Michigan, you know, was one of the ones that didn't. So the Supreme Court once again had to weigh in on that. And then finally we had, you know, we got a break in saying that it was retroactive. So we had the rich sentencing started taking place, not only in Michigan, but throughout the country. I'm happy to say that, you know, since then, there's been over about 1,200 former juvenile lifers that have been released throughout this country that are doing a lot of awesome work. They're entrepreneurs. They're working with nonprofits or violence interrupters. And then I come home, right? So 2018 come, and I knew that I wanted to come out here and do this work. I knew that the only way that we were going to change this was that it was going to take those of us who experience this injustice to be at the forefront and come out and just be very open and honest about what it was that we experienced. Again, we are not saying that we should not be held accountable for the things that we did that you know, to land us there. But I also believe that we can be effective in trying to like create a strong a strong justice system, and don't have to do it on the backs of children, right? Like, how is it that a child, I'm giving an example, a 15-year-old child who wasn't even the principal in a case, right? So he goes with an adult to commit this crime. The adult was able to like talk this kid into say, hey, we're going to get this money. And so you go through the trial process, you get arrested, you go through the trial process, and the adult has the mental capacity and the understanding of the legal system to like plea out to a lower crime. You say, well, listen, give me 15 years, give me 20 years for a second degree. And the child who wasn't the principal, right, who wasn't the one that might not even been near the crime, right, but because he doesn't understand the system, because his parents don't understand the system, because in many cases the prosecutors will go to the parents and say, hey, they'll offer them a plea, right? But what parent is going to agree with a prosecutor to take my child away for 15 or 20 years? And so a lot of times that parent, because they don't believe, that's another thing too, because most parents don't believe that their children are capable of committing these crimes. And so they're like, oh no, we're not going to take this cop. We're going to go to trial, not understanding the ramifications of this. We're going to go to trial. And then that child gets found guilty and he gets life without parole. But the adult who pulled this trigger, he gets 15 years and he gets out of prison and he's going back and forth to prison. But the kid is still sitting there 15, 20, 30, 40 years and still is today, right? Because even after 2012, there are still juvenile lifers currently serving life without parole in the state of Michigan. And there's something wrong with that, right? And so while the legislation doesn't seem to want to move, right? I kudos to Mr. Irwin here because he has been at the forefront of helping us change this, right? He has been one of our strongest sponsors on the Senate side that would change that. And last year during the lame duck session, when we were up there trying to push this, we got very, very close on the House side, right? And originally, when we approached the House Speaker at the time, Joe Tate, he was very skeptical about, pushing this because he felt that they were trying to play it safe. They were trying to play it safe. We had an election coming up. But as we see, playing it safe didn't work out for him, right? And we literally, I was there with Ronnie when Ronnie told him, like, man, you guys are going to lose the House. There's no ifs, ands about it. This is going to happen. And yet they continue to play it safe, and it didn't work out for them, right? But at the end there, even with him playing it safe, Kara Hope, the Judiciary Committee chairperson at the time, moved the bills out of committee. We were able to get them out of the committee, and we were up there for like the last couple of weeks, Safe and Just Michigan, the campaign. We had, a lot of good supporters up there, formerly incarcerated juvenile lifers that were also up there advocating. American Friends Center was another one that was very supportive of that, as well as with the second chance legislation. And so we were up there pushing. And I remember during the last couple of weeks of lame duck, man, there was even one instance where there was a legislator, and I didn't know this until we got up there, where there was a legislator up there whose grandfather himself was a victim of crime of a juvenile lifer, right? And so when we went to his office, when we heard about this, we had a discussion with his legislative aide, and the aide was saying, like, he doesn't know how to support this without having to go back and tell his mom that he supported a bill that would release the person who committed this crime against grandpa. And so we knew that was going to be a tough one, right? We knew that was going to be a tough one. And so we had that conversation. I shared my personal story with that aide. And later on that day, it was like, man, it was almost like it was meant to happen. I'm sitting there in the gallery and I'm looking down, and I noticed that this legislator had walked over to our House sponsor, Amos O'Neill, and they had a conversation. And I remember telling my colleague who was with me, hey, let's go down here and find out what that conversation was about. And by the time we got there, we had got the text that legislator had changed his vote from a no to a yes, right? And that was huge, right? That was huge. That, at times when we thought that things were not going to go nowhere, when we see things like that happening, we knew, okay, we got something going on here. But then law enforcement started weighing in, right? And so law enforcement started sending, emails to legislators and say, hey, we don't support this. This is wrong. We shouldn't do this. Then we also had, at the time, there was a Republican that was on the Judiciary Committee. Grant Filler was, he came out and was just, again, spreading lies about what this did and what this didn't do. You know what I'm saying? They immediately, we talk about like how they use media, right? They immediately started talking about, well, this bill is in support of Ethan Crumley, right? The school shooter, right? Oh, this is going to release Ethan Crumley, right? And so that was always something that we always came across, right? But those of you who know about that case, right? Those of you Like if you have to be real about what happened in that case, right? In no way, shape, or form do we condone what Ethan did. It was absolutely wrong. It was a horrible crime, right? But this was a child that literally in his classroom was screaming out for help, and us adults failed him. I mean, how much more does it get clear when he has a piece of paper that says "help me" on it, right? And this is what we're going to use to now all of a sudden say, oh, this is going to release Ethan Crumley. We failed Ethan, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to use his name to try to like scare the public into thinking that, oh, all of a sudden this is going to, release Ethan Crumley. And the thing about that case is that the way that his sentence is structured, right, even if this bill passes, the chances of Ethan, unfortunately, the chances of that child ever seeing the later die is probably, he might not ever happen, get out, you know what I'm saying? But again, this is the way they use these false narratives. This is the way they start, fear mongering and putting it like this is going to release that person, you know what I'm saying? And this has to stop, you know what I'm saying? And so because of those reasons, I believe that this legislation didn't pass. So now here we have, so we had elections, and of course, as we all predicted, they lost the House, and now we have, the Republicans now are not controlling the House, and so the Speaker of the House, within the first few weeks, came out, and had this big, a press conference, saying that the things that they were trying to push last year, life without parole for juveniles, second chance legislation, any type of good time, legislation, that is not going to fly this year. You know what I'm saying? This is already off the gate, without even having one conversation about this. This is the attitude, right? And so, but that's not going to stop us, right? That's not going to stop us. I think one of the things that have come good about a lot of the juvenile lifers who have been released is that we're out here, we're being examples, right? The numbers don't lie. You know what I'm saying? You have, there's like I said, about 1,200 who have been released throughout this country that are doing some amazing work, and so we need to continue to highlight those stories, just to show them, you know what I'm saying, that we can come out here and be successful. You know what I'm saying? We're not saying, a slap on the hand and release them. At a very minimum, just give them an opportunity to come in front of the parole board and make the case for release. They're gonna have to act quick, because while the legislation is not doing nothing, we have the Michigan Supreme Court that is continuously expanding that, right? So we have 18-year-olds. There's about 270 18-year-olds that when this Supreme Court decision comes down this year, hopefully this year, 270 18-year-olds, and then they're also talking about expanding those Miller factors, as they call them, to 19 and 20-year-olds. There's 580 19 and 20-year-olds that are going to have to be resentenced as well, right? And so what that equates to me, that's a lot of money that's going to happen, right? Number one is a lot of money, and number two is a lot of time. Because here it is, all these years after Miller and Montgomery have been decided, and we still have a group of juvenile lifers from the ages of 17 and under who haven't been resentenced. Just imagine what's going to happen to the courts when we have another 1,000 cases that are going to have to be, resentenced, and all these, there's so much that goes into resentencing, right? And it would be just so much easier if we can just pass legislation to, number one, get rid of life without parole for children, right? And just make it parole eligible for, with the presumption of parole. Put people eligible for parole at a very minimum 20 years, right? 20 more years, it's a long time. That's a lot of years for kids, you know what I'm saying? But at least that way, it's going to save the state a lot of money, and we can finally once and for all get done with this, right? Because this is another thing that's happening too, is that as those juvenile lifers who are going to get resentenced, those who receive life without parole again, and there has been several of them, those sentences are not standing up to scrutiny when they go back up to the Supreme Court, when they go back up to the Court of Appeals, and they're getting reversed, right? Just recently, we had a guy got out after 55 years. He was a juvenile lifer. He got out after 55 years, and he got out after he was resentenced to life without parole 2 times. And finally, the 3rd time around, the court said, enough is enough, give him a term of years and release him. He did 55 years, right? Like, how much more do you want out of kids? You know what I'm saying? And so we need to continue this fight. The Juvenile Justice Task Force has, did some amazing work. But my disappointment in that was the fact that, how do you create a Juvenile Justice Task Force that doesn't, how do you and I have a conversation about life without parole for kids with a Juvenile Justice Task Force? We have the Lieutenant Governor now is running for governor, and he came out and said that he was he's a proponent of reform. I didn't see him nowhere in those meetings, right? And that's nothing I don't get. Like, there's legislators who come out and they come out, we're going to fight for reform, but then when you're out there fighting for these reforms, you don't see them nowhere around. And so, but again, I am happy that some changes have taken place. The expungements, I think that those expungements will also be extended to juvenile lifers. You know what I'm saying? That my crime happened 30-something years ago. I'm out here doing all type of stuff. You know what I'm saying? I haven't reoffended. I'm off parole. That extension of expungements will also be offered to juveniles because we were kids when the crime was committed, and even though we were sentenced as adults, we were children when those things happened. And I can go on and on and on and forever, so I'm going to go ahead and shut up and take some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And as always, we have some great questions for the sake of time so that we can get to the next panel. I think what I would like to do is ask two of them and then have anyone answer that would like to. One of the questions is, and this we've sort of answered this as we've gone through, but what impacts are we expecting on juvenile criminal justice reform from the Trump administration, either federally or at the state? And I think we've talked a little bit about this, but if you have anything you want to add. The other is, and this is, I think, a more general question, what do the youth currently being held in Michigan jails and prisons wish the public, attorneys, and policymakers knew about them?
We'll let Irwin answer the Trump question.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this gives me an opportunity to say that, like many of the folks I encounter on a regular basis in my life, I'm genuinely concerned about the potential authoritarian takeover of our democracy, and I'm worried about what the next election might look like and all of that. Having said that, one of the things that is a happy note during these times of great concern about all of that is that the justice system is really a state and local system, right? When we think about like the police or we think about the courts, those are almost always local police or maybe state police, and they're almost always local and or state courts. And so will there be some impacts from potential, funding streams that, the state enjoys to use to serve people better? Yes. Will there be problems, particularly with funding streams in the mental health area for kids? Yes. And we're grappling with all that in the legislature right now. Last week we had some hearings about, what's going to happen with Medicaid, what's going to happen with some of these substance abuse programs that we depend on to serve everybody, adults and kids. So I don't want to minimize the concern that all of us have about how these changes could affect the criminal justice system, but I do want to go back to where I was going already, which is that these systems are governed by states. They are governed by the people who are elected to be our next governor, our current governor, our next legislatures, our current legislatures. So that gives me another chance to get on my soapbox and just try to encourage everybody. I know everybody looks at the presidency first, or many people do. Flip it upside down. Look at your local prosecutor first. Look at your sheriff first. Look at your city council first. Those are and judges. Almost, the ballot drop off for judges is tremendous. So when you know who your judges are and you vote for them or you vote for the other person, you have even more power in that relationship. So please, just remember that a lot of these things are very local, and criminal justice is one of the things that's most local.
Anyone want to take a stab at just some quick takeaways? What do youth inside? What do they want policymakers and lawyers and just community advocates in general to know to help?
I'll speak from the juvenile lifer aspect, because that's the the community that I worked for the most, and I still work for a lot in there. I recently visited a young man that was he's facing juvenile life without parole as we currently speak. I went to the Wayne County Youth Home and got a chance to talk to him, and I think kids want adults, man, just to we're kids. You know what I'm saying? We're kids, and no matter, I got a button that says, and you guys sell shirts. Kids who get in trouble, man, are kids. You know what I'm saying? And they're always going to be kids. And there's no way, again, we can hold children accountable, man, for some of the things that they do, right? But us as adults, man, we have to also hold ourselves accountable, for creating those environments for those children, right? I remember when I first came home and I was working at out on the east side of Detroit. And every time, I swear, every morning on my way to work, I would ask myself, man, what does a child think when he walks out his home and this is what he sees, right? And all I was seeing was just abandoned house after abandoned house. What do you think a kid's gonna do, right? This is his reality, you know what I'm saying? And, far too often, legislators legislate from a distance, right? There's so many of them that are not even willing to go into the very same communities that they create legislation that's going to affect these communities, you know what I'm saying? And so we need, legislators need to get in proximity of these problems. We hear, Brian Stevenson always talks about proximity. Like we have to get close to these problems to really, really understand what's going on in our communities, They're just so much. They're just so much, man. And so I think, at the end of it, man, just kids, man, just want to be treated as children, man. You know what I'm saying? They just, I can't emphasize that enough, right? That no matter what happens, man, that we can hold children, accountable, but they are still children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose, and the whole entire panel. Thank you for this great discussion.